Some days live in history forever. September 11th, 2001 is one of them. 22 years later, on a warm September evening in New York City, a young man walked onto the America's Got Talent stage wearing a firefighter's uniform, and Simon Cowell felt something he rarely experienced. Fear. Fear that what was about to happen would break him completely. His name was Michael Reilly. He was 25 years old, but he carried himself with a gravity that suggested he'd lived much longer. The uniform he wore wasn't a costume. It was authentic FDNY gear, complete with the patches, the worn edges, the unmistakable weight of real service. The jacket bore a name across the back, Reilly, and beneath it, a number, 343. The audience recognized what they were seeing immediately. The number 343 meant something specific to anyone who remembered that day. It was the number of firefighters who never came home from the Twin Towers. The applause was respectful, almost reverent. This wasn't entertainment walking onto the stage. This was memory. This was honor. This was someone carrying 22 years of grief in his posture. Simon sat at the judges' table, his usual critical expression completely absent. He looked at Michael with an intensity that suggested he understood, even before a word was spoken, that this was going to be different. The host approached Michael with a gentle expression that matched the mood in the room. "Welcome to America's Got Talent. Please tell us your name." "Michael Reilly." His voice was steady, trained by 2 decades of holding himself together. "I'm from Queens, New York. And can you tell us about the uniform you're wearing?" Michael looked down at the jacket, his hand moving to touch the name on his chest. "This was my father's uniform, Captain James Reilly, Ladder Company 3. He responded to the World Trade Center on September 11th, 2001. Michael's voice remained controlled, but his hand pressed flat against his father's name. He went in to save people. He never came out. The theater fell into profound silence. The judges sat motionless. In the audience, people were already crying, already remembering where they were that day, who they lost, how the world changed. "I was 3 years old when my father died," Michael continued. "I don't have many memories of him, just fragments. His voice singing to me before bed, his laugh, the way he smelled like smoke and coffee when he came home from the firehouse. But my mom made sure I knew who he was, what he stood for, what he gave up." Simon leaned forward, his elbows on the table, his full attention locked on Michael. This wasn't a judge assessing talent. This was a human being witnessing something sacred. "What are you going to perform for us tonight?" the host asked quietly. "I'm going to sing my father's favorite song. It's what he used to sing to me when I was a baby. My mom has it on video, one of the last recordings we have of him. I've listened to that video thousands of times. And tonight, I'm going to sing it for him, in his uniform, so that for 3 minutes, he can be here again." The host nodded, too moved to speak, and stepped back. Michael adjusted the microphone stand, his movements careful, as if the uniform made him more aware of every gesture. He looked out at the audience, then up toward the ceiling, toward something beyond the lights and the cameras. Simon pressed his hands together in front of his face, already struggling with emotion, before a single note had been sung. The backing track began. Not a pop song, not something contemporary. It was "God Bless America," arranged simply, with just piano and strings. The song firefighters had sung at memorials for 22 years. The song that had become synonymous with resilience and remembrance. Michael took a breath, and he began to sing. His voice was strong, clear, and filled with a controlled emotion that came from years of practice at not falling apart. He sang about the land he loved, about standing beside her and guiding her, and everyone in that theater understood that he wasn't just singing a patriotic song. He was singing about his father, about the 342 others, about everyone who ran toward danger while others ran away. The audience sat in absolute stillness. Many had their hands over their hearts. Some were saluting. Tears streamed down countless faces. At the judges' table, one of the judges, a woman, was openly crying. Another judge had his head bowed, and Simon Cowell, who had built an empire on being unbreakable, sat with tears running down his face, not even trying to hide them. Michael sang through the first verse, his voice growing stronger, as if channeling not just his father but all the fathers, mothers, brothers, sisters who never came home that day. The uniform seemed to stand straighter on his shoulders. He was carrying them all. By the chorus, half the theater was singing along quietly, unable to stop themselves. God bless America, my home sweet home. The words took on weight, became a prayer, became a promise that what happened would never be forgotten. Simon stood up. He didn't plan it. His body simply refused to remain seated. He walked around the judges' table onto the stage and stood at attention 6 feet from Michael, his hand over his heart. Michael saw him but didn't falter. If anything, his voice strengthened. He sang the second verse, about mountains and prairies and oceans white with foam, and everyone understood he was singing about the country his father had died protecting. As Michael reached the final chorus, Simon walked closer. When the last note faded, Simon was standing directly in front of him. The audience erupted in applause, but Simon held up his hand, asking for quiet. The theater fell silent. Simon looked at Michael, at the uniform, at the name Reilly across the chest, and when he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. Michael, I need you to know something. He paused, collecting himself. Your father died a hero. Everyone knows that. But what you just did, honoring him like this, keeping his memory alive, making sure a whole new generation understands what sacrifice looks like, that's heroic too. Simon reached out and placed his hand over the name on Michael's chest, over Captain James Reilly's name. He's here with you, right now. I believe that with everything I am, and he is so unbelievably proud of the man you've become. Michael's composure finally cracked. His face crumpled and tears spilled over. But he remained standing, the way his father had trained him, even at 3 years old. Reilly men don't fall down. Simon turned to the audience, his hand still on Michael's chest. On September 11, 2001, 343 firefighters gave their lives to save others. 343 families were destroyed. 343 children grew up without their fathers. And tonight, one of those children stood on this stage in his father's uniform and reminded us all what courage looks like. He walked to the judges' table, and without hesitation, he pressed the golden buzzer. But this time, when the golden confetti fell and the music played, it felt different. It wasn't celebration. It was salute. It was honor. It was a standing ovation not just for Michael, but for every person who wore a uniform and ran toward danger. Simon returned to Michael and did something unprecedented. He saluted him. A formal military-style salute to the uniform, to the memory, to the sacrifice. Michael returned the salute, his hand trembling but steady. The audience remained standing for 5 full minutes. The applause was mixed with tears, with memories, with gratitude. First responders in the audience came forward to the stage. Police officers, firefighters, EMTs, all saluting this young man in his father's uniform. After the cameras stopped rolling, Simon stayed with Michael for over an hour. They talked about loss, about fathers, about carrying legacies. Simon shared his own experiences with losing his father, and for that hour, they weren't a judge and a contestant. They were two men who understood that some absences never stop hurting. Simon arranged for Michael to perform at the 9/11 memorial ceremony that year. He ensured that every penny of prize money would go to Michael, regardless of how far he went in the competition. He personally contacted families of other fallen firefighters and arranged for a special tribute performance. Michael's audition aired on September 10th, the day before the anniversary. It became the most watched AGT audition in history. Fire departments across America held viewing parties. The video was played at memorial services. It was shared millions of times with the caption, "Never Forget." Michael went on to win that season of America's Got Talent. But more importantly, he used his platform to advocate for first responders, to push for better health care for 9/11 survivors still suffering from exposure-related illnesses, and to ensure that children who lost parents that day had support systems. He donated his father's uniform to the 9/11 Memorial Museum, where it now sits in a place of honor with a plaque that reads, "Captain James Reilly, FDNY Ladder 3, Hero, Father." Forever remembered by his son, Michael, who carried his voice forward. Years later, when Michael had children of his own, he would bring them to the memorial. He would show them their grandfather's uniform and tell them about the man who ran into burning buildings to save strangers. And he would sing to them the same song his father had sung to him. Because that night on the America's Got Talent stage, Michael Reilly didn't just perform a song. He fulfilled a promise that every child of a fallen hero makes. The promise to make sure the world never forgets. The promise to live a life worthy of the sacrifice. The promise to carry the torch forward even when it burns. Simon Cowell, in an interview years later, would say that in 20 years of judging, Michael's performance was the only one that made him question whether he belonged on that stage. He didn't need judges, Simon said. He needed witnesses, and I was honored to be one. Because that night wasn't about talent. It was about remembrance. It was about a son loving his father so much that he put on his uniform and sang his song and made sure that for 3 minutes, Captain James Reilly lived again. That's not entertainment. That's love that transcends death. That's not television. That's a promise kept. And sometimes, just sometimes, those are the performances that matter most. Never forget.